is KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Hey, heed all who enter, and beware this podcast. This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer along with Kevin Flaherty. We are brought to you by Emprise Bank. We're a partner in all things possible, member FDIC. Kevin, how you doing?
Doing well, Nick. Doing well. How was your Memorial Day weekend and setup?
You know, it was good. It was good. I got to go home and see my family, which was always nice. And actually hit the golf course for the first time in a while. I'm not a big golfer, but I went out and tried my best, and I did okay. I mean, it is what it is. But, I understand it was your birthday over this past weekend, so
it was
right?
It was, and so the wife planned kind of a little bit of a different birthday trip, I guess. We went up to South Dakota, which I'd never been, got a chance to see Mount Rushmore and all that stuff, and actually spent my birthday day at Deadwood out there, kind of seeing some of the sights and everything from, not just historical perspective, but also from, the HBO series for those of you who like it. It was a little bit of a different experience. We had a good time, and then on our way back through, went and saw Fort Laramie, which if you ever played Oregon Trail, is kind of a popular site in that game to restock all your goods and everything else. And it was kind of cool seeing that too. So had a really good weekend.
Yeah, there you go. That's awesome. Well, depending on when you're listening to this, KU will be 13 weeks away off the 2024 football season. I know we had the discussion last week about, oh my God, 13 weeks sounds Don't worry. It's going to come here eventually. And, of course, we here at Paid, we have a fun series for you that we're going to be continuing here today, the Jayhawk Rewind. We're into the second game of the season with KU taking on Illinois. Before we dive into that, though, some news broke earlier today on Wednesday as we record of KU signing Jared Goff to a long extension through 2031. So Kansas now has their athletic director locked down through 2031. Kevin, what do you think this move means for KU, and how important do you think it was to get Goff long-term?
Yeah, stability is obviously such a huge thing. I think, when you look at realignment, stability is important, when people want to see all of that. And the other thing is, obviously, Goff is going to be tied to Lance Leipold. That's maybe, 1A with, 5 exclamation points in terms of he hired this guy, how's this going to go, all those different things. But I think when you look across the athletic department, Kansas has kind of experienced, I don't want to say necessarily an unprecedented level of success, because you had, like the 2007, 2008 year, you had, 1993, where you went to the Final Four, you went to the College World Series, you played in a bowl game around that, in that 1992 season too. But, from like a long-term perspective, I can't remember the athletic department being this healthy in terms of, having potentially the best basketball coach in college basketball. Some people would obviously argue right now for Dan Hurley, with UConn winning the last 2 national titles. Looking at football, the growth that they've had there, and coming off the success, him, of course, hiring Lance Leipold. Baseball has seen a major uptick here recently. Women's basketball has had success. Volleyball has had success since Goff has been here. And I'm not saying all of those different things are attributable, strictly to him, but it does seem like the athletic department's kind of churning on all cylinders right now. And Nick, I think maybe none of those cylinders is as important or as vital moving forward as what we kind of talked about a little bit, I think, last, time, in terms of fundraising, construction, and the way this football program is being built for the future.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head with the term stability, right? A time in college athletics and the college athletic landscape where it is the most unstable it's maybe ever been. You've got NIL, you've got the Super League, the alleged Super League, you've got, conference realignment, all kinds of just craziness. And now when you look at Kansas, you're right, there's arguably your 3 most important positions in your athletic department: your athletic director and your head football coach and your head basketball coach. They've got those locked down in the long term, which is very significant. And obviously, it makes sense, right? I mean, Jared Goff is a KU guy, and obviously he's the one presiding over the Gateway Project. So you want him to stick around and see that through to its completion. So Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think it's well deserved, well earned, right? I think Travis Goff has so far been a really, really strong hire. Probably you had to give him a grade, maybe like an A+, considering what he's done since he's gotten to KU. So, yeah, I think it all makes sense, and I'm very happy for Travis Goff, and I'm very happy that he continues to lead the way for KU.
Yeah, I think, there's a certain touch that being an alum at a school or a program can help. I think.
Oh, for sure.
There are some circumstances where those guys don't work out for one reason or another. But I think when you talk to Goff and hopefully we'll get him on this podcast at some point. But when you talk to Goff, you can really feel the energy and the passion that he has for the Kansas Athletic Department. You talk to people outside of the Kansas Athletic Department, other coaches, other people in athletic administration. They talk about how competent KU's athletic department is, the alignment that is there. All of those things are relatively new without throwing anybody else under the bus, compared to how it was before Travis Goff got here. And so certainly a well-deserved extension at this point.
Okay, so let's dive into our Jayhawk Rewind series. We started this last week, 14 weeks to the start of KU football season. KU played 13 games last year. We got Missouri State out of the way, KU's FCS opponent. Now we're jumping into KU's Week 2 opponent, their second game of the 2023 season as we look back and build up to the start of the 2024 season. This one is going to be very exciting, I think, for a variety of reasons, most notably because this is an opponent that KU is going to be seeing again in 2024 coming up this fall. That is KU taking on the Illinois Fighting Illini. So Kansas comes to this game at 1-0, and after the win against Missouri State. And Illinois, they were 1-0 as well after a very tight win against Toledo. And a new quarterback and Luke Altmaier, transferred from Ole Miss, who was a highly touted recruit, then transferred in from Ole Miss to Illinois, making a second start. You got Brett Bielema, it's a Big Ten team and so on and so forth. So they're going to play physical football. Kevin, what were your thoughts initially the week heading into this game as KU? It was a blackout Friday night game. What were your thoughts heading into this one?
Yeah, for one thing, being a Friday night game was fascinating in itself because they had the Friday night game the previous week as well. But this one was intentionally a Friday night game to get you exposure, right? The previous week was on ESPN+. Jayhawk diehards were tuning in, but not necessarily the rest of the country. But I think when you looked at social media over the course of Kansas's game with Illinois, you saw that a lot of quote-unquote national people, a lot of people across the sport were tuning in to watch that game, and it got them a lot of eyeballs in that time slot. I think you had, obviously Jalen Daniels missing the first game, and so you had that situation. They said, hey, if this was a huge game, Jalen probably could have played. You never know exactly how you feel about that. Is that just something that they're saying, or is it true? And so to see Jalen Daniels take the field for the first time in 2023 was a positive. I worried about how Kansas was going to deal with Illinois' physicality on offense. I thought it was a game that Brett Bielema was probably going to try and line up and run the ball 45 times. And if Illinois won, great. And if they didn't, that stinks. But hey, we still ran the ball 45 times. And on the other side, Illinois had a defensive line that was touted as being among the best in the country. Illinois' defense had been kind of an elite defense the previous year. You returned Yerzon Newton in that group and that group of players. And it was a really interesting defense, I think, for Kansas to face in that the way that it lines up, they had 3 down linemen who were all kind of defensive tackle type guys. They had 2 edge guys that would kind of come up. And so rather than looking like I guess you would call it a 3-4 typically, it looked more like a 5-1 or a 5-2, depending on what they did with the safety. And so it was a type of defense that you weren't necessarily going to see a ton. And you wondered, hey, how is Kansas going to scheme around this defense? Are they going to have issues blocking these guys up front? And the answer, fortunately for Kansas, was came out pretty affirmatively.
Yeah, I mean, you think about heading into this game, Kansas was going to face maybe one of the top 2 or 3 defenders they were going to see all season, with John Newton probably in the middle, a guy that was a fringe first-round pick projected at the time and then ends up getting drafted right at the end of the first round and the beginning of the second round at defensive tackle. And for me, I looked at this game and I thought, this is a real measuring stick game for Kansas. You're at home. You're facing off against objectively a very average Big Ten West team and Illinois, right? A very average team. You're playing at home. This is a game that, similar to the discussion with the Missouri State game where, hey, if you want to be in the upper echelon of the Power 5, Power 4 teams, you go out, you take care of business, you whoop up on an FCS opponent. Here's another example where you want to be considered one of the top teams. Well, how about you defend your home field against an objectively pretty average team in Illinois? So that was kind of my thought heading into it was, Jalen Daniels is back. It's a Friday night under the lights. It's a blackout game, right? Like, you're going to have that national exposure, like you said, Kevin. Go out and, prove it. Go out and make something happen. So there was a confluence of a lot of very interesting storylines heading into this game as well, when you consider all that with Jalen Daniels stuff, playing against Illinois' defense, playing on a Friday night, all that. And I'm excited to dive into this one. We're going to dive into the game after this quick break. Before we do head to break, though, I'm going to tell you about Home Field Apparel, one of our sponsors. Home Field Apparel has over 130 different colleges, unique universities. They've got some professional sports as well. They've got auto racing. They've got Hendrick Motorsports. I'm a NASCAR guy, so I got to say that as well. But they've got everything you could possibly want. Of course, they have Kansas as well. Over 30 different Kansas items, from sweatpants to T-shirts to hoodies to jackets. They got a bomber jacket. They've got a retro shooting shirt. Anything you can think of, it's over at homefieldapparel.com. And if you use the promo code KCSN23 on your first order, you get 15% off. That's right. We got your promo code KCSN23, 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. We're back to break down this game between KU and Illinois coming up next.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest-ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm alongside Kevin Flaherty. This is the Jayhawk Rewind, where we're going to take you through every game in the 2023 season for Kansas football, leading up to the start of the 2024 season. We're in week 2. This is KU and Illinois. Kansas at home, under the lights, blackout. They've got the sick Warhawk black jerseys. Kansas, everything's awesome. We're fired up, taking on Illinois. And Kevin, the game gets underway, and Kansas was very dominant early, extremely dominant early. You saw the electricity of Jalen Daniels. Kansas was able to go right down the field. The defense played great early as well. And right down the field, they get their first touchdown. It was on this play, a touchdown pass from Jalen Daniels to Torrey Laughlin, a little back shoulder throw to the corner of the end zone. They got the scoring started for KU. And I think this is a great example of something we've touched on over the course of this offseason already, which is Torrey Laughlin is a guy that you can use in a lot of different ways. And there he makes a great catch to get Kansas on the board early against Illinois.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. The Hall of Fame baseball player, Wee Willie Keeler, kind of famously said that his trick was, hit it where they ain't. And looking at the way that Kansas attacked this Illinois defense, they used angles in the running game to kind of make those big guys move and have to chase a little bit, running it where they weren't. And then you saw a lot of horizontal throws, a lot of stuff that wasn't super far down the field, but was attacking really those horizontal areas where they maybe didn't have guys. You hit on one of those for a touchdown pass, big-time throw on the back shoulder, great catch, for Torrey Laughlin, who plays running back, but, is a really skilled guy. You don't usually see running backs making back shoulder catches like that. But I thought it was really instructive to see the way that they attacked that defense. They weren't going to sort of beat their head against the wall against those guys. And we talked about this last week with Missouri State being the first game after the Arkansas game and how overmatched up front Kansas was against Arkansas the previous year. That was something that I was really watching against Illinois was, like you said, the physicality. Illinois is going to be really big up front. How does Kansas handle that? And not that Kansas wasn't physical, because I thought Kansas was extremely physical throughout, but they also, kind of stacked the cards in their favor a little bit by the way that they attacked that defense.
Yeah, this ended up being a dream start for KU to this game. You get a 3-and-out to start off defensively, and Kansas goes right down and scores a touchdown. Illinois comes back and again pretty much sputters They get 19 yards on the next possession before they have to punt the ball back. You're already up 7-0. You get the ball deep in your own territory. Kansas proceeds to go on a 13-play, 85-yard touchdown drive. And I think you mentioned it, Kevin, with how Kansas approached this game is they realized, hey, listen, maybe we can't out-physical Illinois, but with the speed that we have on the perimeter and with a guy like Devin Neal in the backfield, we can certainly beat them laterally and use our quickness. And that's what we saw, I think, on that next drive from Kansas that led to this play for a touchdown on a little play-action pass in which they got the ball to Jared Casey, the forgotten man. He scores a touchdown to get Kansas up 14-0. And yeah, Jared Casey's another guy that, listen, last season and really over the course of his career, we've seen him be sort of that gadget player, a guy who is kind of, the player you forget about because he's usually just blocking. But he is somebody that I'm very intrigued by. I know we've touched on it with the injury to Deshaun Hanukkah, but does his role as a receiver expand at all with no Hanukkah, or is Trevor Cardell able to step up, possibly fill that role? But that was another great touchdown pass there from Jalen Daniels. Great chemistry to Jared Casey. He's up 14-0, and the Hawks are cooking, Kevin, at this point.
Yeah, and you look at that play, it was another attack to the flank, right? Another throw, sort of that short to intermediate, toward the sideline. It was easy money. Jalen Daniels released that ball before Casey had really even gotten into his break, and it was right there. I think you bring up a really good point with Jared Casey in that last year he didn't necessarily have the year that he had the year before, and I think a lot of that was because Jalen Daniels didn't play, and he played 3 games, and so when you look at Casey, he has that chemistry with Jalen Daniels. It's somebody that Jalen feels really comfortable, looking at. And so you could see it's sort of a re-ramp, if you will, of his production if Jalen's able to go through this year healthy, because I think there is a little bit of a connection there.
So Kansas up 14-0 in the fourth quarter. And after a couple of months back and forth, we had one of the better plays that I think we've ever seen. And that was this play. It was on a third down, deep in their own territory. Jalen Daniels, we talked about Johnny Newton. Here he comes right up the middle. Jalen Daniels backsteps him in the end zone. Could have been a safety, rolls out to his left and somehow finds Lawrence Arnold, who makes a fantastic catch. It was a 3rd and 5, deep in their own territory there. And that really kick-started that drive for Kansas that allowed them to go down and eventually score another touchdown, which we'll get into. But Kevin, when you saw that play, what was your reaction? That is I think it was thrown around at the time even, but that is a Mahomes-esque play.
Yeah, and I know we talk basketball on this show, but it was the equivalent of a hesitation dribble, right? Because you kind of, the way you step back and then move forward, and just the sheer audacity to even try that, to try that move in your own end zone. I mean, Johnny Newton is an All-American defensive lineman, wound up with 2 sacks, had really, was one of the Illinois players one of the best Illinois players on the day. And, Jalen Daniels stared him down in his own end zone, didn't panic, made him miss in space, and then makes the big play down the field. And it's interesting because I think it was either that play or maybe slightly after that, the announcers are talking, and they say, as good as Jason Bean is, there's just something about this team with Jalen Daniels cooking. And I think that's something that we'll talk about sort of throughout, this series and going through, is Jason Bean played some really good quarterback last year. But if you're looking for reasons to get excited about Kansas, in 2024, I think one of the biggest things is I think people have almost, I don't want to say forgotten, but you almost miss how special Jalen Daniels can be in creating those moments that there just aren't other players, not just in the Big 12, but not really other players across the country that do stuff the way that he does like that.
Yeah, and that's the part that is, on one hand, exciting, but also frustrating about going through this.
Sure.
You are reminded of a play like that where, listen, like you said, I mean, Jason Bean obviously was phenomenal, but Jason Bean is just simply not making that play. It's just not happening. So there is a certain element of that you miss without Dylan Daniels in there. But yeah, great play there. And then a play that was also kind of forgotten about maybe later on in the drive that helped Kansas continue down to go for a touchdown was this play. later on in the drive. This is Trevor Wilson making a one-handed catch, a phenomenal catch later on in the drive to get Kansas into the red zone when they were still up 14-0. So this was fascinating to me because, Trevor Wilson, I think, has gotten this sort of reputation of being just a straight line speed guy and can't really do much else, but they're showing off a great catch. And he's a guy that, listen, he's going to have a role somehow on this team in 2024. But it was really awesome to see him make a play like that where he was able to show off a little bit more of his versatility.
Yeah, we talk about the receiving group, and that was a big part of what we talked about last week, about how it's so tough to defend those guys because you can't focus on one guy. And this game was another example of that. We'll get to some of these other guys, but the catch on the Jalen Daniels scramble was a great play by Lawrence Arnold.
I guess we didn't do a very good job of doing Lawrence Arnold's catch justice on that play. We were too busy, oohing and ahhing about Jalen Daniels. But yeah, phenomenal catch.
Yeah, Trevor Wilson makes the one-handed catch. We're getting ready to see a terrific Luke Grimm catch. Douglas Emillion makes a play down the field a little bit later, in terms of catch and run. And I think that's what makes this group so dangerous, is it's not just one guy. And quite frankly, when you look over the course of the entire season, it felt like every wide receiver deserved to be in SportsCenter's top 10 at some point, and so great catch by Trevor Wilson, kept the drive going, and they wind up going in and getting a key touchdown.
Yeah, that led to this play with Devin Neal scoring a touchdown. Of course, it wouldn't be a KU game without Devin Neal. And Devin, you thought he was phenomenal in this game. I know he had a couple of plays where he broke some guys' ankles. Just, I don't know. I mean, I guess at what point does it happen in this game, or maybe later on in the season we have the discussion? But at what point did you feel that Devin Neal was him, for lack of a better term?
It's funny because there was a carry later in this game where he breaks, I think it was early in the second half, he breaks a 43-yard run where he's really patient. He kind of sets up the hole, then makes a really sharp cut that puts two Illinois defenders on the ground separately. And it was one of those things where Devin Neal had been so good up to this point, right? He was really good as a freshman after he went into the starting lineup and kind of won his spot. He was really good as a sophomore, and yet you could see that there was something different. And we talked about that last week with the Missouri State game. You saw a little bit of that, but the cuts were sharper. The agility was more on point, and you just saw, okay, Devin's a little bit different than he was the previous year.
So at that point, if you're Kansas, you're up 21-0. There's a little bit of time left in the first half. You're thinking, this could not be going any better. I mean, you're up 21-0 at home. It's a blackout. The crowd is hype. Illinois does respond, though, later in the first half, towards the end of the first half, with 47 seconds left. They get a touchdown to Tip Ryman, who was another guy that ended up getting drafted, by the way, in the third round for Illinois. So that gets Illinois on the board. So now it's 21-7. And Illinois, at that point, there's 45 seconds left in the half. Illinois is thinking, okay, we're on the board. Let's just, we'll kick it down to Kansas. They're going to run it out. Everything's fine. 21-7 half. Everything's good. And wrong. Instead, this play happens. Jalen Daniels again scrambles out to his right and throws an absolute laser down the field. On the run, when he's about to take a hit and flings it up, and somehow Luke Grimm comes down with it in the red zone for Kansas with 23 seconds left. And that allows another touchdown for Kansas. But just another fantastic play. I mean, you got two incredible plays from Jalen Daniels in the span of about 30 minutes from going back to the play he had against Johnny Newton in his own end zone. And then this play at the end of the half, in which Illinois has got to be ripping their hair out. They're thinking, okay, we're only down 14. Let's just get to half. It's been a rough first half. And then lightning strikes again in the form of Jalen Daniels.
Yeah, I mean, if you're Kansas when it's 21-7, you're thinking, gosh, we've absolutely dominated this game. And we're going to go into halftime potentially, only up 14 points. This is still a game. And instead, you have the big play from Jalen Daniels, a guy, I think that deserved a lot of credit on that drive too, is Daniel Highshaw. He had a nice carry where he kind of battled through a couple guys to get out of bounds and stop the clock. And then, he winds up scoring the touchdown on a play where he gets met at about the 1.5 yard line and, gets met right there, goes ahead and pushes the guy in. Obviously, Daniel Highshaw's power is not in question, and we'll talk about him more as the game goes on. But I really thought that Highshaw had a really nice bounce back game. This is one of his best games of the year. Almost hit 100 yards overall, but 2 big plays on that drive. The one that we're always going to remember is going to be the Jalen scramble and the catch by Luke Grimm. But, don't sleep on Highshaw, one, getting out of bounds to stop the clock on the earlier play. And then on that touchdown run, getting Matt kind of in the hole and still just pushing the guy into the end zone to put your team up, 21 points at halftime. Then you're going to get the ball coming out of the half. And so just like that, sort of the wind out of Illinois' sails.
Yeah, I think you brought up a great point of if that game does go to half at 21-7, the mood is probably a little nervous at that point, right? Because, again, you really did kind of absolutely dominate, and yet Illinois is able to go down and score a touchdown late to sort of zap the momentum back before the end of the first half, but not so fast, of course, with the play from Jalen Daniels and then the touchdown run from Highshaw. So now you do go into the half up 28-7, and then life is good again. You grab the momentum back, as you said. KU gets the ball first to start the second half, and at this point, you're feeling really, really confident about where Kansas is at and looking to go 2-0. Now, in the second half, I don't know about you, Kevin, but I felt like Kansas maybe let their foot off the gas a little bit at times in the second half. To start the second half, you come out, you end up with a field goal at one point. But the other interesting storyline of this game, and one of the critical storylines of this game then projecting forward to the rest of the season, that was Austin Booker.
Yeah.
And Kansas, of course, we've touched on it. And you have the same sort of discussion this offseason as well, which is, oh my gosh, pass rush. What are we going to do about this pass rush situation? And going into last season, it was Jeremy Robinson and then Hayden Hatcher, and hopefully some guys can break out. Well, boy, this was a game where a guy did break out, and that was Austin Booker in the second half. He gets this sack on a play that I know you really loved, Kevin, where he just kind of gets around and gets to Luke Altmaier and pile drives him into the turf. As you're watching this unfold, did you expect that Austin Booker would maybe then become the player that he would become throughout the course of the season, or did you think this maybe was just a one-off situation, a one-off game for him, and maybe Kansas might still need to search for answers at the defensive position?
I really liked him as a transfer in general. It's kind of funny. I know I've talked to Michael Swain over at Bong.net about this. Kansas, I think I'm trying to remember the timeline. I think they offered Gage Keys first. And I went to Gage Keys' Twitter profile, and he was retweeting his teammate who said, "Here are my practice highlights. I'm in the portal. Take a look at me." And, I said to Swain, I was like, man, nothing against Gage Keys. I really like this guy for Kansas. But, this other guy, his teammate, I like him even more. And you're never sure how a raw player will take to coaching, how quickly they'll polish up and things like that. That sack that you just showed was ridiculous. I mean, he throws the offensive tackle back, knocks him onto the ground, works his way back inside, engages with the guard, and then when Altmaier pulls the ball down, he disengages with the guard and is on the quarterback so quickly. And that was one of those things where you just say, ooh, that wasn't the sort of thing where something went wrong along the offensive line or whatever else. That was a motor and an effort sack in addition to having ability. And I think the way that he flashed in this game, you thought you'd see more. You didn't necessarily think, hey, this is a first-team all Big 12 defensive end that I'm watching. But you did see the ability there, and that wasn't even his only sack that quarter.
Yeah, he had another sack later on in the quarter in which he completely goes inside and undercuts the tackle and then literally submarines Altmaier for his second sack, which was pretty impressive to say the least. And yeah, I think those two sacks kind of demonstrate really the yin and yang of Austin Booker, where you saw the power of him. I mean, listen, anytime you're knocking a tackle on his ass, you're doing something right. I mean, come on, we got to be honest here. I mean, you're doing something right. But then there he goes on the inside and makes another sack as well later on in the quarter. And really, even though the defense ended up giving up more points in the second half, they made some nice plays throughout that second half, including the couple of sacks there. You also had a great Melo Dotson interception that happened as well early in the second half in the third quarter, in which he was opportunistic. And this was something that we would see a lot of this season with Melo Dotson, Kevin, where he was just always in the right place at the right time, making great plays. And, sometimes, especially as a corner, it's a position of opportunity, right? Sometimes you just got to put yourself in the right spot to make plays. And sometimes you get a little bit lucky. And that was the first of many plays that Melo Dotson would make over the course of the season.
Yeah, and you think about the defense, and we'll get there, but the offense, they scored on 5 of their first 6 drives and scored 31 points on those drives. They scored 3 points the entire rest of the way, and we'll get to why, that happened. But Illinois comes back and makes a little bit of a game of this. And at the end, this is a game that Kansas very easily could have been in an even more uncomfortable spot if the defense wasn't making some of those plays, wasn't making some of those big stops. And I think, the interception that you talked about there, obviously the interception that we'll get to at the end of the game was a big one. Kansas finishes the game with 6 sacks, 9 tackles for loss. The big plays were there, and that was a big part of the reason that even as the offense kind of sputtered out, and there were different reasons for that, like you said, you could even say some of it was potentially taking your foot off the gas. Even as that happened, the defense was out there, sort of churning out big plays.
Well, one big play that I know they're going to want to forget about was Luke Altmaier just randomly running for 72 yards. Kevin, this was a crazy play where it's like, as you're watching live, you're thinking, okay, where's the guy that's going to come tackle it? Oh, wait, there's no guy. Oh, okay, he's just going to, and
it's a 3rd and 18. Kansas already has 4 sacks at this point. They decide to send 5 guys, and the way that it looked like it was set up was to kind of try and overload one side. Well, on the other side, guys got out of their rush lanes. And
there was no one.
Well, the whole field opened up, and Illinois ran some crossing route type stuff. And so Kansas was in man coverage behind all of that. Everybody had their back to the quarterback. And by the time they realized that there was just this airplane hangar-sized lane for him to take off, it was too late. And it wasn't actually the only touchdown that Kansas would give up to Luke Altmaier where they lost, rush lane integrity, but it was certainly the more staggering of those, giving up a 72-yard rushing touchdown on 3rd and 18. And one of those things that I don't want to necessarily call it a fluke, but it was kind of fluky the way that it all played out, just sort of serendipitously, I guess, for Altmaier on that play.
Yeah, and you go back to something you mentioned heading into this game, which was, Illinois being a Big Ten West team, Brett Bielema, we're going to run the ball. Kansas completely shut down Illinois' rushing attack, really for basically the entire game. And when you look at if you look at the box score, you think, oh, well, Illinois ended up averaging 5 yards per carry. That's because they had a 72-yard run from Luke Altmaier. You take that away, and the Kansas defense completely stymied Illinois' rushing attack for basically the entire game.
72 yards on one carry. On the other 27 carries, Illinois had 67 yards.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that one carry was more than their other 27 carries combined. And so, yeah, it was a big mistake and was one of those things that I think at the time was frustrating, but you're still not maybe freaking out yet. You're just kind of like, well, that was kind of a fluky play. And then...
Yeah, and then another play we do have to mention here is Austin Booker absolutely pile driving Luke Altmaier. I mean, just destroying him on what looked like a pretty clean play to me, but ultimately it gets turned into a targeting call, and Austin Booker, see ya.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where, you get the stop basically on the 2-point conversion play. Targeting gives them another chance on it. They get it. We talked about the offense kind of making some mistakes in there, or different things happening. You have a Lawrence Arnold fumble, where you're going to have a first down in the red zone, basically, after he catches a little slant route. He turns the ball over. Douglas Emilian actually catches a pass, makes the guy miss it, and gets into the end zone for another touchdown. That one gets called back for, I think, a pretty iffy block in the back on Mason Fairchild. Not a whole lot there. And then Jalen Daniels, and this one is one I didn't necessarily mind. You have basically a deep shot one-on-one with Trevor Wilson on a post route. He decides to push this thing down the field, give him a chance. Wilson has a step or two. He just left it too short. I know the announcers, kind of blistered Wilson on that play, said that, he didn't fight for it enough. Wilson, he had a step or two. If that ball is put a little bit further, one, it gives him a better chance to fight for it if there is a fight for it. And if he releases it even a little bit earlier, maybe, that's a play that maybe isn't even contested. But you don't mind Jalen Daniels taking that one-on-one shot down the field on a post route like that. But all of a sudden, you take the $1 million, the block in the back on Mason Fairchild that meant you kicked a field goal rather than scoring a touchdown. You have the Lawrence Arnold fumble inside the red zone. You hit through an interception in the end zone, and all of a sudden you have 3 drives that look like they were heading toward points, and you get 3 points total out of those drives, and the offense is really stalling out at that point.
Yeah, and circling back to the Jalen Daniels interception, I think it's so interesting because Jim Panagos, the quarterback coach, actually had, or not Jim Panagos, Jim Zabrowski, got to mix it up. Zabrowski actually had a quote earlier this spring in which he was talking about, hey, I want to see our quarterbacks make throws that they believe they can make, which means, I don't want them to be timid about throwing the ball down the field. If they see an opportunity, I want them to go get it versus being scared to make a throw. And I think that was an example of that where Jalen Daniels felt that he could make that throw and it was just a little bit under and led to the interception. But again, given the game circumstances, you're still up 19 at that point. It was 34-15. It was in the fourth quarter. You still feel like you're in good shape to win the game. But it was one that unfortunately did then eventually lead to Illinois going down and making it a bit of a tighter game.
Yeah, and if you score a touchdown there, that's it. That's the haymaker. That's
for sure.
The whole game. And so I don't have a problem with the decision at all. Just left it, like I said, a little bit short. You want him making that throw, though. And I think, I think Jalen probably wishes, man, if I'd put a couple more feet on that thing, or even, like I said, if he releases it just a little bit earlier where there's more end zone to kind of place that thing into, that would have been, well and good too. As it was, Illinois gets another stop, and then, it winds up getting a little bit tighter yet again.
Yeah, Kansas eventually would hang on, though, for the win, 34-23. Illinois did make a comeback, as you said. They got another touchdown late, but Kansas would hang on for the win, 34-23 over Illinois. And at that point, listen, you're 2-0. You're 2-0. You're feeling pretty good. And like I said at the top of this is a game that's even more interesting because of the fact that this is an Illinois team that you're going to be seeing again coming up this fall on the road in Champaign. So when you think about how this game unfolded, Kevin, the results of this game and kind of what happened then going forward in 2023, and then projecting out into what you think might happen with KU and Illinois coming up in 2024, what kind of jumps out to you about that KU going on the road coming up this fall?
Yeah, I'm interested to see how Kansas attacks Illinois with the running game again. Is it a similar thing? Does Illinois kind of adjust to what Kansas was able to do in terms of exploiting, those angles and things like that? There's no more Jerzon Newton. And so, that's, he was kind of a singular player at his position in college football. And so, he's not there anymore. Does Kansas and new offensive coordinator with Grimes, how did they decide to attack that defense? I think this is such a fascinating game in 2024 because I realize the final scoreline wound up being closer, but Kansas really handled Illinois for a large portion of that game. And you look at, I've kind of drawn the comparison to Kansas State and Missouri, 2 years ago. Missouri comes into Manhattan. Kansas State, kind of puts a whooping on them pretty bad. The next year, Kansas State comes back, goes over to Missouri. Missouri's a better team. Missouri's playing at home. They're dealing with a lot of the motivation from the previous game, and it winds up being a lot closer contest. And it wouldn't surprise me at all to see something similar play out with this game in terms of Illinois potentially being a little bit better this year, even without Johnny Newton, Tip, Raymond, some of those other guys there. I do think Illinois has a chance to be a little bit better this year than they were last year overall. And so sending that game to Illinois, the motivation that comes from, hey, we played these guys last year and they beat us, fairly solidly or whatever, this could wind up being one of those games that people maybe aren't circling as being a potentially tricky contest. That could wind up being a tricky game. And so I do think, it was such a measuring stick game for Kansas last year. It could wind up being a measuring stick game early for Kansas this year as well.
Yeah, and for Illinois, Luke Altmaier will be back, I believe, as their quarterback. So have another year. He's definitely a talented guy. And playing at home for Illinois maybe could spark them. I mean, you think about my concern is, I don't know, maybe this is just me being kind of, I don't know. But basically, I'm thinking in my head, you play at Illinois, and Illinois is going to want to probably impose their style of football a little more, and maybe they have more success doing that at home versus trying to take that style on the road with Brett Bielema. So, yeah, I could agree more with everything you said. I think this is a game where, yeah, you might look back at this game. First of all, you might look at the score and think, well, it was kind of a close game, but Kansas really dominated. What does that mean for 2024? I think it should be an interesting game for Kansas on the road in Champaign taking on Illinois. And I think, it will be another measuring stick game. As it turned out in 2023, after this game, my confidence really soared sky high in the sense of, okay, you're playing Nevada, one of the worst teams in FBS. They lost to an FCS team, 3-0. Let's see how far you can take this thing if you're Kansas with Jalen Daniels. And as it turns out, Jalen had more injury problems, which we'll get into as we go over the course of this series. But yeah, I think when you look at this game, again, you saw the flashes of brilliance from Jalen Daniels in this game that you didn't really get to see again for the rest of the season, right? I mean, in Nevada, he struggled, and then he dealing with the injury, obviously didn't really see much after that. So this is really the last game where you got to see Jalen Daniels sort of at his peak. And if you are able to somehow, if you're Kansas, if you're somehow able to take this game, but turn it into a whole season, you're talking about a Kansas team that should be right there for the Big 12 title at that point. And that is kind of where maybe you see the dreams of KU football fans of, oh gosh, if you can just somehow, get that for a whole season, because this is really the last time you got to see him do his thing, which was exciting and disappointing. Again, exciting obviously to see him in this game do what he did, but also disappointing because of the fact that you just got a little taste, but you didn't get to see it anymore after that, which is frustrating. And so, maybe looking forward to Illinois in 2024, this could be another game where Jalen Daniels does his thing, but hopefully instead of it being sort of the beginning of the end, so to speak, because we didn't get to see him do it anymore, hopefully it's the beginning of a long season of Jalen Daniels highlights that we can look back on and leading Kansas, hopefully, to a Big 12 title.
Yeah, I was trying to think off the top of my head as you were talking about that, because obviously Jalen missing the Missouri State game, his back-to-back games there against Power 5 opponents, you had the Arkansas game and then the Illinois game. And obviously, over the course of those two contests, he was just brilliant. I was trying to think if there was another example, that would match up in terms of, maybe in 2008, Todd Reesing was really good against Missouri to end the year and then Minnesota in the bowl game. But generally speaking, tough to think of a lot of KU quarterbacks that stacked back-to-back games against power opponents like he did against Arkansas and in Illinois. The stats against Illinois weren't necessarily as off the charts, obviously, as they were against Arkansas. Overtime helps with that a little bit too. But just the poise that he played with, right? Like he was so mobile, he was elusive. There was a lot of pressure. There was a decent amount of pressure on him over the course of the game when you go back and watch it, that either, Illinois just missed a sack, he made a guy miss, he got the ball out soon enough. Illinois wound up with 2 sacks, and I thought Illinois' defensive front played pretty well against the pass. I thought they did a pretty good job of getting guys in and around Jalen Daniels' area, and for him to only take 2 sacks, both from Johnny Newton, actually, it really showed just how on he was. Obviously, creating a couple of those plays just out of pixie dust, basically, was pretty impressive. But he also had some nice plays where he just, made a really good athletic play to avoid a bad play. And I think that when you watch the Illinois game back, the stats are the stats, but at the same time, you come away with such an appreciation for what he was able to do outside of the stat sheet in terms of playing that way.
Yeah, to me, the creativity is my biggest takeaway, right? I mean, you can look at the box score and you'll see Jalen Daniels deep pass to Lawrence Arnold, Jalen Daniels pass to Luke Grimm, back in the first half, and you'll think, oh, okay, those are good plays. And then you watch and you're like, oh my God. I mean, that's again, we're talking Mahomes-esque level plays, for Chiefs fans, obviously. They know what that's like. And so that was really what stood out the most. And again, obviously, we'll talk about it throughout the course of this offseason. Jason Bean was fantastic. Jason Bean had some games where he made some fantastic plays. But it was just clear and obvious that there was just a difference. There's just a difference in the creativity ability when you have Jalen Daniels out there playing at 100%. And that's what you got to see in this game against Illinois. And again, unfortunately, it was really the beginning of the end of that in 2023. But you hope that he can rediscover that in 2024. All right, well, that's our Jap Rewind for this edition of Pay Heat on I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. Thanks so much for tuning in. No matter how you're listening or watching, we're going to be having some highlights on YouTube, so be sure to go check those out. If you were listening, you can watch some of the highlights we were discussing here in this episode on our YouTube at KCSN and the letters U. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and also leave a 5-star rating and review as well for this podcast. 13 weeks from the start of K football season. We're getting 1 week closer every single week. Just hang in there. Hang with us all throughout this summer here on the Paid Podcast. Until then, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We will talk to you again soon. See ya.